Hello, sweet friends, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. Today, we are going to make 2 winter decor quilts in one weekend. This really cute Nordic table topper, and this runner that could also be used as a wall hanging. The Arrival of Winter table topper and runner is a free pattern you can download from the Riley Blake Designs website under the Free Patterns tab. I've printed out a stack of these patterns, so if you like this project and you want a kit, I'll include a printed copy of the pattern for free with your purchase. You can find the Arrival of Winter table topper and runner kit on our website at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. Both projects are centered around this beautiful creative panel by Sandy Gervais for her Arrival of Winter collection. The panel is available in this mist color and also in navy. We'll be using the mist color today for our projects, but we also have the navy in our shop. The pattern starts off with a strong advisory not to pre-wash or pre-starch your panel, as this will definitely make it more difficult to fussy cut the motifs in the required sizes. With that said, let's start cutting. The first thing the pattern has you do is fussy cut the 3 Nordic star blocks from the panel. All 3 are cut at 10.5-inch square. I'm going to use my 12.5-inch square to cut them out. I'm also going to use some painter's tape and mark the 10.5-inch line. Don't put your tape right on the line. Give yourself about 1/8 of an inch so you can see if something is misaligned. Mark the bottom edge first, and then mark the side. The center point of a 10.5-inch square is 5 1/4. So I'm going to use one of my So Handy stickers to mark the center of the square. I'm not putting it right exactly on the point, I'm putting it just past the point. So if I need to line something up in a motif here, I can see the line exactly. This is just a reference to get me to the center of the square. Now it'll be very easy to center the Nordic star block. You can also use the diagonal line that runs through your square ruler to run through the center of your Nordic star. That way you know you have it positioned properly this way. And that should do it. Let's cut it. You're going to cut on the right side and across the top. Turn the panel around and make sure nothing is tucked under so you don't accidentally cut something you shouldn't. And line up the cut corner with the measurement. So this bottom edge is going to line up with the 10.5-inch line, and this left side is going to line up with the 10.5-inch side. Get it nice and square, and cut the right and the top again. And there you go. Now we're going to do it again for the other 2 blocks. While you have the panel laid out, the pattern has you cut the letters. Please note that all the letters will be cut with the same height, but not necessarily the same width. The sizes are clearly marked on the pattern for each letter. I'm going to go ahead and get my letters cut out and set them aside for the second half of this project. Now, it's not going to be quite as easy to cut out the letters as it was the Nordic star blocks. But here's a couple tricks that you can do. First of all, we can still use the painter's tape. We just have to move it. So for the letter T, it's going to be 10.5, so we don't have to move this, 10.5 inches tall, but it's going to be 11.5 inches wide. So I'm just going to move my painter's tape to just past the 11.5 inches mark. And the center is not going to be 5 1/4 anymore. It's still going to be 5 1/4 from top to bottom. So I'm going to carry that line across. But half of 11 1/2 is going to be 5 3/4. So I have to move this over to here. So just know printed panels are not perfect. Fabric gets stretched even during the printing. So my suggestion is to take the bottom of all the things and get a set amount. We know everything's going to be cut at 10 1/2. So I would make this 1 1/2 at the bottom. Since every letter might be positioned a little bit differently, I'm going to make sure the bottom of every letter is at 1 1/2. You do need to make sure that this is straight up and down, and that's going to be a little tricky. You might have to just average it out until you get the best look. So right now I have this bottom line lined up at 1 1/2 all the way across, but if you look here, this top of the T is off by 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to scooch that down and split the difference, and no one's going to be able to tell when they're looking at this. Next, we want to make sure the letter is centered in the block. So we are going to check that our 5 3/4 inch line is centered on the letter. All right, I think that's about the best that I can get that centered up. So I'm going to go ahead and cut. Same as before, right side and the top. Only this time I'm going to take this completely out. Turn the T around. And now I line up the bottom with the 10 1/2 inch line and the left cut side with the 11 1/2 inch side. And just to double check that I did everything right, from here to here is 1 1/4 inch. From here to here is 1 1/4 inch. So I'm feeling pretty good about my positioning. Now, fussy cutting these things is not the easiest thing, especially if you're a beginner, but here's a little trick. If you get it really off, you did some math badly, you can trim this down a little bit more and then add what's called a coping strip. There's plenty of this background from the scraps in here that you can just sew it around and nobody will ever know. It'll look like you meant it to be. I'm going to get the rest of my letters done and set them aside for the second half of this project. Just a quick note about the letter I. This is the only letter that is trimmed down to 8 1/2 inches wide. Because of this really cute foliage detail, you can't put the letter right in the center of the block. I found the best placement is to line up the bottom right serif, that's the little part that sticks out from the bottom of the I, at the 1 1/2 inch mark. This actually evens out the motif and puts a little more balance to the placement of the letter. Of course, you can do whatever works for you, but I think this looks great once it's lined up next to the letter W. You will not need the leftovers of the panel for this project, but you can see there are some really cute star prints here and a few background strips that are going to be great in my scrap bin. The pattern is written very well. The fabric instructions come with a picture of the fabric you need to cut, so there's no guessing what fabric goes where. The cutting instructions are simple, and there's even a clear and concise tutorial within the pattern on how to use the stitch and flip method and how to make 2 at a time half square triangles. I went ahead and followed the instructions and cut all my fabric so we can put these two cuties together today. If you like, you can pause the video here, go get your cutting done, and we'll sew our pieces together. Don't worry, I'll wait. All right, here are all my cut fabrics. and I've broken them up into the two projects. The first project we are going to make is the mat or the table topper. Here I have all the fabrics for the table topper laid out so you can see what we've got. We have the 3 Nordic square blocks that are 10.5-inch square. We've got 2 of the main fabric, 10.5-inch square. We've got 2 of the main fabric, 11 inches square, and 2 background 11 inches square. We also have our strip pieces for the border and the strip pieces for the binding. The first thing we're going to do is make the big half square triangles for the table topper. Now, keep in mind that this fabric, the main print, is a directional fabric. You want these little cute birdies sitting up nice and tall on their branches, so make sure your fabric is turned the right way. Put a background on top of the 11-inch square. Draw a diagonal line on the back of the background fabric, corner to corner. And this is where you have to be careful. If you want your birds to sit up properly, you need to draw the line from the upper right to the lower left. That way, when this presses open, like this, your birds will be sitting up nice and straight. And you're going to do that for both of your 11-inch squares. This is the 2 at a time half square triangle technique. So you're going to sew on both sides of the line. Make sure it's a good scant 1/4 inch, so when this fabric folds back on top of itself, it comes out just right. All right, I'm going to go sew these and I'll bring it right back. With this method, once you have your half square triangle made, you have to square it up to make sure it's right. The best way to square it up is to use your diagonal line on your ruler along the fold or the seam line of your square. And you want to make sure you've got your 10.5-inch measure within the fabric block and that you've got some to trim off here. In order to make this come out right, you really do have to use a scant 1/4 inch. It's just too close if you don't. So I'm going to restate, use a good scant 1/4 inch seam line when you're sewing that diagonal, and that will give you plenty to trim off so you get a beautiful point right here. And plenty to trim off so you have a lovely square that fits exactly correctly. So there we go. I've got the top and the bottom trimmed off. And now I have my half square triangles. And here I have all of my half square triangles sewn. The way this block goes together is to lay out your Nordic blocks, 1, 2, 3 in a diagonal. You can pick whichever one you want at the top and one that you want at the bottom. And obviously my table isn't big enough really to do this, but we're going to work it out. It's going to be fine. You guys are smart cookies. You'll see what's going on here. The half square triangles go next to the Nordic star blocks with the background fabric towards the center. And the remaining 10.5-inch blocks of the main print go in the 2 opposite corners. And you want to make sure your half square triangles are facing the right direction so your birds are sitting on their branches. And that's the layout. Now I'm going to sew these 3 together, these 3 together, and these 3 together. And here I have my blocks sewn together in rows, and I'm about to sew the rows together to make the inside of the quilt top. You want to press your seam allowances towards the solid blocks and away from the half square triangle blocks. That'll put the seam allowances out on the top row, in on the middle row, and out on the bottom row. That way these seam allowances will all nest and you'll be able to get perfect points every time. I'm going to go sew these together and we'll get started on the border. And here are all my blocks sewn together. The last thing to do is to add the 2-inch wide strips around the outside for the border. At this point, the top should measure 30.5 inches square, but you should measure your top to get the exact measurements before you cut your border strips to get the best fit. And that's it. Now, I'm not really a fan of a square quilt. I prefer a rectangle. So I'm going to fancy mine up a little bit, and you are welcome to follow along. I'm going to add these adorable star borders from the panel to the top and bottom of my quilt. To add the star borders, we first need to trim them down. I folded my star strip in half, making sure to line up the stars on each side. That way I'll be able to keep my cutting straight and even. There should be enough left over to make them 3.5 inches wide. Using a long enough ruler to cover the full length, position the ruler so the lines fall along the center squares. The center squares are 1 inch, so the lines will actually fall on each side. But to make them 3.5, you have to adjust about 1/4 of an inch. So it'll be 1.25 to this side of the star and 1.25 to that side of the star. And trim. I've already trimmed this one. Once you've done one side, you can turn the strip around, lay your ruler, double check it for 3.5, but also make sure your lines are straight along the sides of the star, and trim again. Once both sides are trimmed, now we're going to have to adjust for length. Now you're going to cut 1 star off the end of each strip. Be sure to leave 1/4 inch of the star you're cutting off for a seam allowance. Line up your ruler so you know it's straight and perpendicular, and then put the 1/4 inch line right on the points of the stars and trim. This is your seam allowance. Do that to both ends. Using one of the wider scraps from the background of the panel, cut 4 1.25 by 3.5 inch pieces to sew on the ends. The background color is really light, so make sure you have the right sides together. This is the wrong side. This is the right side. And line that up right there. And I recommend sewing from this side so your seam allowance goes perfectly for those star points. And this is what the finished end looks like. If your top measures differently, then just adjust the width of the strip to fit your top. Add these star strips on the top and bottom of your quilt before adding your borders. And look, how cute is that? Especially since we have a directional print here, this is going to give it a top and a bottom. I really like how this is looking. So now all we have to do is add the border. And here's my top all finished. I added the star strip in order to give it a little bit of length, so I have an oblong rectangle instead of a square, and I just think it turned out adorable. The original size of this topper is a 33-inch square. By adding the Nordic star stripe across the bottom and the top, you end up with a 33 by 40-inch rectangle. If you wanted to make it a little bigger, you could add an additional outer border to give you whatever size you would like. I think the punch of this dark teal around the outside makes this absolutely beautiful. Well, that's it for this top. Let's move on to our table runner. It's time to make our winter wall hanging or table runner. This is going to be really fast and easy. I know it looks like a lot of parts, but most of it is straight line sewing. Here we have our stack of letters that we already have cut to the proper size. We have an inner border and an outer border. We have a corner squares, and these turn into stitch and flip triangles to make our faux scalloped border. We also have binding and an end cap, and that's it. This is going to be very fast. Let's get started. The first thing the pattern has us do is gather all our letters, sew them all in a row to spell the word winter. It should come out to about 62.5 by 10.5 inches tall. Okay, and this is what it looks like when you get all those letters together. This is really a nice long table runner. The finished size on this is going to be 75 inches. The next step is to put these coping strips that are 2.5 by 10.5 inches on the ends of our letters. After these go on, then you will also add these 1.5 inch strips that go around the letters to finish off the floating border for the letters. Once you have your floating border around your letters, it's time to make the scalloped edges. We're making a faux scalloped edge by using two 1.5 inch squares in the upper corners of these 3.5 by 6.5 inch rectangles. This is going to create a little scallop like this, and that is going to go all the way around this table runner. So here is our stack of faux scallops. Now, one thing that is lacking with this pattern is it doesn't have a lot of pressing information. So here is a really good tip. When you're pressing these half square triangles in the stitch and flip method, press one seam allowance down and one seam allowance up. You'll see that this is important when you go to sew two scallops side by side. In order to get this beautiful point right here, these two seams need to nest. So if you have these going up and these going down, that point is going to nest and you're going to get a really great point right here. You've got a lot of these to sew together, so you want to have it as easy as possible to get that point. The very first thing you're going to do with your scallops is make two pairs just like this. And then you're going to take your 4 3.5 inch squares and add them to the sides. This is going to make your end piece for your runner. Once you have these two done, set them aside and then start sewing these together. You're going to be making 2 rows of scallops to go right here next to the floating border. You'll continue matching up pairs and scallops until you make 2 rows that will attach to the bottom and to the top of the table runner. All right, here I have my faux scalloped border all the way around, and oh my gosh, it looks so good. Now, this part is going to be the thing that takes the longest for you to put together, but look, it is so worth it. One little note I wanted to just confirm and say one more time. If you do as I suggest, press one of your seams up and one of your seams down, making sure, of course, all of them are done exactly the same way. Then when you go to press this whole strip, look at that. All the seam allowances are going the same direction. That's going to make your life easier. And when you go to sew this strip on, all those seam allowances are going with your presser foot so you don't get any twisted seams. So this makes a really great little tip for pressing. All that's left is to add this outer border to finish it off. And look how great this looks with the background border attached. It really makes the faux scallop border come to life. Just one note on the border, pay attention to how these borders are applied. In the pattern, the top and bottom borders are attached first, and the side border is attached second. It's not really a big deal if you do it the other way around, more like a quilt, but your pre-cut strips won't fit. So if you wait to cut the length of your border strips until you are ready for them, you will always be able to cut them to the correct size. Well, I am so pleased with both projects. I may make another set to give to a friend. Oh, and by the way, at the last minute, I decided to add a border to the table topper to make it more of a small throw for the couch. So as an added bonus for watching all the way to the end of the video, I will add the instructions and the actual border fabric for the optional border to your purchase of an Arrival of Winter Topper and Runner Kit at no charge. Type in the word winter in the notes section at checkout and you will receive the fabric and the additional instructions for free. You can find the Arrival of Winter Topper and Runner Kit in our online store at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. I hope you enjoyed our winter decor projects. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you get notified when we put out more fast and friendly projects like this one. Now go sew something sweet. Bye!